Welcome to the wonderful world of seaweed. Yes, seaweed. Seaweed is actually pretty awesome. I grew up with seaweed. No one's probably ever said that before, but it's true. And I'm going to tell you why in this presentation. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to do your bell work here. You can see multiple different kinds, at least two actually. So this one here and that one there, but you could have guessed how they were holding on. Maybe some of you wrote roots, that's okay. It's wrong. And then 3 was kind of your take on the whole thing. All right, so seaweeds, they have a general structure. They're called macrophytes, macro larger, as opposed to phytoplankton. These are larger organisms, multicellular, obviously eukaryotic. Each of the cells has a nucleus, right? But the difference between terrestrial plants and seaweeds is there's no true leaves, there's no true stems, and there's no true roots. Okay, so we'll find out what they do have. Okay, here are just some different examples of red. They come in different colors, green. Some of them look like leafy, but they're not really leaves. Some of them look very odd, actually, very unique. The complete body, the whole body from the top to the bottom, is called the thallus. And all portions, this is what's cool about, if you compare an oak tree to a macrophyte, algae, just the leaves of an oak tree can photosynthesize, but the entire thallus of algae, marine algae, seaweed, can photosynthesize. It's pretty cool. They have chlorophyll in all different parts. This is a kelp forest in California. It's too cold, it's too warm, I should say, here in Florida for kelp to grow. But we have lots of other interesting things, like sea lettuce, we have that. So this is kelp, a form of kelp. They have leaf-like portions, but they're not leaves, and they're called blades, just like a leaf blade, I guess would be called. And those are used to increase the surface area for photosynthesizing. No veins. They get all of their water fluid absorption through the tissues. They don't have to carry the fluid from point A to point B like a terrestrial plant does. Ulva lactica. It's literally lettuce, okay? And you can eat it, just like lettuce. If you've ever had sushi, you've probably eaten that before. I personally do not like it. Okay. Now some seaweeds have nematocysts. The reason I don't like it is because I grew up with it. Just the taste, ugh, don't like it. Nematocysts are little balloons, gas-filled bladders that allow the seaweed to stay afloat, or at least in the photic zone, so that they can photosynthesize as much as possible. Some nematocysts hold different types of gases. Some hold carbon dioxide, nitrogen, or even carbon monoxide. Mono meaning one. Giant kelp has some pretty big ones. We used to call brown seaweed in New York pop grass, because you could take these and pop them like the packaging bubble wrap. Some of them have stem-like structures called a stipe. This is giant kelp that washed up on the Pacific coast. I don't know who that boy is. So here's the blades and the stipe, which is kind of like a stem, and then we'll get to the holdfast, which is kind of like roots, but not quite, next, stipe. And then here's the holdfast. Okay, so here's 3 different pictures of structures that secure the thallus, the entire plant, it's not a plant, it's a seaweed, to the substrate, okay, to the bottom, so that when the waves are crashing, they don't get knocked off. Now, once in a while, when the waves get really rough, they get knocked off and washed up on shore. Hold fast. Exactly what it does. It holds fast. That's where they get the name from. So here are some really, these are the weirdest ones. These are like Dr. Seuss, things. So these are sea palms. We don't have these here. I wish we did, but cold water only. And they have amazing holdfast, look like fingers. And there's the stipe, and those are the blades. And this is when the tide has gone way out, exposing them. And then when the tide comes back in, these blades just back and forth like this, and the waves, and they just absorbing solar energy. So here's a comparison between, and you have to fill this diagram in a little bit on your notes. Here's a comparison between a terrestrial plant and a marine alga or seaweed, okay? So, in plants, terrestrial plants have leaves, they perform photosynthesis, like we said. The stem supports the entire plant above the ground, and some of them, if they're green, they perform photosynthesis, like weeds and stuff, but most do not. And then, of course, it has a root system to anchor it in place so a wind doesn't knock it over, and it also absorbs nutrients this way, okay? Now, seaweeds are different. They're supported by the surrounding water. If the tide goes out, they go, poof, and they just fall over, and then when the tide comes back in, they come back up again. And the whole organism performs photosynthesis, like we said, absorbing all of their gases and the gas exchange and nutrients from the water itself. So there are different kinds. The green algae, that's called chlorophyta. Only 10% of all the 6,000 to 7,000 species are marine. The rest of them are freshwater. Some species are endophytes. An endophyte is an organism or plant, so to speak, that live in the tissues of other plants. We have them terrestrially here, right in Florida. If you've ever seen, a strangler fig. Okay, a strangler fig, a bird will lay will poop a seed from the strangler fig out into another plant, and then that strangler fig will grow, and it'll take over the entire tree, typically palm trees. So that's an example of a plant living within the tissues of another plant. Here's an invasive species that lives in Maui, Hawaii. An endophytic, almost parasitic. More sea lettuce. This is chlorophyta, green algae. Dead man's fingers. Doesn't look quite green in this picture, but it is. Codium, it's called. It's called dead man's fingers. Wonderful name. Now there's the phaeophyta. Phaeophyta, that's your brown algae, and they come from olive green to dark brown in color because of the yellow pigments that they contain. And many of them have those nematocysts we talk about, and they're called rockweeds or racks, W-R-A-C-K-S. You can find these on our shore, right here in Palm Beach County. All along this coast, you've got those brown layers of sargassum weed that have washed up from the Sargasso Sea out in the Atlantic, and they've got little nematocysts in the little nematocysts, and you can pop them. There's gas inside. Here it is. Sorry. So normally it floats in the ocean like this, and sea turtles and all kinds of critters live inside of it way out in the ocean. But when the winds and the tides are right, the right time of year, they wash up like this all along the shore and make a mess. But it's a natural mess. It's not like pollution, although you're going to find a lot of pollution mixed in with it. It's a natural thing, and it eventually turns black, dies, and goes away. And animals live there, animals live in it, animals feed their birds, run around and eating all the little critters and stuff and crabs, and it's quite natural. Just we don't like it because we like white sandy beaches, right? Sometimes in some places they'll come by with a vehicle, at the public beaches, and they'll scoop it all up. It makes good fertilizer, compost. So what happens is, so here we are, right? And you know, we learned about gyres and the Coriolis effect and how it makes North Atlantic go clockwise and the south of the equator go counterclockwise. And out in the middle here is the Sargasso Sea, where it looks like this everywhere. And because of the equatorial and Atlantic and the Antilles current here and then the Gulf Stream, it's grabbing some of this stuff and bringing it up onto our shores. It's called Sargassum weed from the Sargasso Sea. Kelp. Kelp is extremely important. Kelp is important for ecosystems as well as industrially, economically, nutritionally. A lot of people eat kelp around the world. So it's a complex group of brown algae, temperate latitudes, not subtropical like here in Florida. Like I said, food, and then can be 100 meters long. I'm sure some of you have eaten kelp. Again, if you've eaten any sushi, you've eaten seaweed. Some of you probably crunch on those seaweed squares. I just cannot. No. Kelp can grow 50 centimeters per day. That's like that. Per day, per diem, okay? When the conditions are right, of course. Temperature, sunlight, nutrients, all that stuff. Lots of pneumatocysts to keep those long stipes upright and getting as much exposure to sunlight as possible. They form kelp beds and kelp forests on the colder waters, and that's where sea otters like to find their food. Sea urchins and abalone and all kinds of stuff. Now, there are economic, like I said, and ecological importances, okay? So kelp is here, and sargassum is here. You have to know this information for both of these organisms. So, and I underlined the most important kind of ideas here. So, kelp forest, you can read this on your own. I'm not going to read this verbatim to you. You are high school students, you know how to read. But please know that you may have an FRQ in the future that asks you to discuss, describe the economic and or ecological importances of kelp and or sargassum weed, okay? So highlight that. All right. Rhodophyta. Let's hear red algae. There are approximately 4,000 species. There's more species than green and brown algae, more marine species. They're deeper. Not the other ones are deeper. These are shallower. It has all to do with the amount of sunlight that penetrates to certain depths. Because the further down you go, the different kinds of light get absorbed by the water, and red is like the last color that gets the deepest, I believe, and from what I remember. And so you're going to find these in more shallow marine environments, okay? Coralline algae. So this is some from England, in the tide pool from England, but we do have some here in the Keys. We also have some. It's a red algae that has calcium carbonate deposits in it. So it's not really soft, it's a little bit crunchy. It's a little bit crunchy. Very important in, like I said, several marine environments. This is from England, but there's also some in other parts like Florida. Okay, now we're gonna move on from algae, seaweeds, to plants that have adapted to marine environments, okay? They're not sea plants, they're not seaweeds, they're not terrestrial plants, kind of like a hybrid, all right? And so they're flowering plants, again, that have adapted to the marine environment. So seagrasses, Mangroves are examples, and we'll talk about a couple of others. Now, an angiosperm is a flowering plant. All those other ones were not. They don't develop flowers, or they don't have pollen or anything like that. These do. They have true leaves, true stems, true roots. They have those specialized tissues you learned about in biology, xylem and phloem for moving fluids, okay? Sugar-containing fluids from the leaves down, and water and other nutrient containing fluids up. Only the seagrasses, like these, as on the Florida coast, are truly marine. These are terrestrial plants that are just kind of dipping their feet in the salt water or the brackish water. So seagrass, okay, they're not true grasses. Their closest relative are lilies. These are lilies, so they're very closely related to that. They do have pollen, like I said, and seeds, just like terrestrial plants, but they're carried by the water instead of the wind. And most species are found in tropical, like here. I'm from New York. There are no seagrasses. It's too cold. Down here, there's seagrass beds everywhere. Sea turtles, love them. Manatees, love them. Lots of animals live in the seagrasses. Very important habitats for shellfish, providing breeding and feeding grounds, shrimp, crabs, fish, turtles, manatees, numerous migratory birds. There's something called prop scarring, and that's an idiot. Remember that word, because that's one of them right there. Look what this person is doing to the seagrass bed. Very important ecological habitat. This guy out fishing wants to catch fish, probably sitting at the bar a couple hours later after he got off the sandbar, drinking with his buddies, saying, "I wonder why there's no fish out there." It's because he's destroying their habitat. You see the ignorant behavior there, okay? This is what it looks like if you were looking at one straight through, and this is what it does. You see, you're supposed to stay in the channel for a reason. That's what these channel markers are for. But then you got Joe Schmo driving right over the seagrass beds, making these prop scars that don't come back for years. It'll stay like this for many years until it eventually grows back. If it does. If some other invasive species doesn't come in and prevent the seagrass from growing back. Prop scarring. All right, different kinds of grass are eelgrass. That's the genus because it's italicized and capitalized, so Zostera. This is the most widely spread of seagrasses. There are about 50 species. This is in Florida. This is a permit fish feeding on seagrass. It's a jellyfish floating over some common eelgrass. Very highly productive, provide children food, variety of animals, and it's only found in shallow, well-protected areas of water, bays and estuaries. Then we have turtle grass. Turtle grass spreads with these rhizomes. You're going to have to draw a picture of this for your field guide, okay? Genus Thalacea, similar to eelgrass, but the leaves are broader and more strap-like. Muddy and sandy bottoms, up to 10 meters deep, and of course, they're very important for stabilizing the substrate, the bottom, near coral reefs. So they have a relationship to each other. Everything does. Everything is related to something else on the planet. You affect something over here is going to be affected. And what humans, and so many of them still don't realize it, but for many years in the past, they didn't realize, oh, we'll just cut these down, it's fine, or we'll just fill this in, it'll be fine. And they don't realizing what they're doing to the other environments around them. Salt marsh plants. These are dear to my heart, okay? I grew up on the salt marshes of Long Island, South Shore of Long Island. Born and raised on a coastal community where these marshes were our life. Weekends after school, holidays, summer, hunting, duck hunting, goose hunting, fishing, clamming, you name it. I wrote a whole book on it, and I'll show you what the cover of that book in a minute. But so salt marsh plants, cord grasses, and its species Spartina, or Spartina. Some people say Spartina. They are true members of the grass family. Actually, people used to put their cows on the salt marshes to eat this stuff because the snow would cover the land pastures in the wintertime, but these, because the tides would go up and down, the snow never stuck. So they would put their cows out here and they would eat the grass. There's plenty of grass that's not covered by snow. Tolerate lots of salt because the salt tide comes in, tide goes out, covers them. You know, the leaves are typically always, unless the highest high tide, like a hurricane or something, are always exposed to air. You see how they have seed heads, and these are their seeds. So, or flowers actually. Very odd looking flowers, yes, but so are all grasses in the grass family. So here's the book that I wrote. It's a memoir. That's a bay house. And so my family had a bay house, still there. It's a long story. If you want to read about it, it's in the book. This is what it looks like. Manhattan is about 25 miles, 30 miles in that direction to the west. So this is Sunset. And that's all Spartina grass, all on there. And we didn't live there. I want to live there now, but there's no electricity. It's just like a shack out on the marshes, you know, above the water, and it's a really cool place to go and hang out. And then we would also use the grasses. We would pull them up out of the marsh, and we would put them on our duck boats or regular boats and make them into duck boats so they can camouflage them, and we can go duck hunting in the fall and the winter time. So Spartina has become invasive. Everything can become invasive. So this is where it's supposed to be. See, here's Long Island, here's Florida, this is where we are right now, right there. And so it belongs all along here. Somehow, a vessel of some kind, a boat or whatever, brought some seeds or plants or something on it. Either someone pulled their boat out here and brought it over here and then put their boat in over here, maybe, or down through the Panama Canal, I don't know. But all along here, it has become an invasive species that has been growing along the seashore, where it didn't historically belong. Now, there are other salt-tolerant plants. They're called halophytes, or halophyta. Pickleweed is an example. This is pickleweed. Even little mices like pickleweed. But many chefs, famous chefs, come up with pickleweed recipes, and these grow right out on the shore, and people eat the stuff up like crazy. It's like a delicacy or whatever. You know, you might see it on a haughty-tawdy restaurant's menu or something like that. Pickleweed, the recipe for it. They're also called sea beans. They call them sea beans, like string beans. You just eat them raw. Wipe them off. Now we're in the last part of our notes, mangroves. You've all seen mangroves if you've been down by the intercoastal at all ever, okay? These are the trees that grow along the shore line down there. They won't grow on the ocean side, it's too wavy, they'll grow on the estuary side. And they are trees that have adapted to a salty environment around the whole world. Land plants, they can tolerate salt. And again, protected from waves, muddy and sandy bottoms. So there are 3 major species that exist here in Florida that we should be aware of in this class. I think it's important. Red mangrove, it's the one that grows closest to the water, sometimes in the water, typically in the water, like this. And they exist all from Jacksonville, all the way down, all on the coast in the Keys, all the way up. There's a little area here that they don't exist in, and then there's some up here, and even along here, but not much any further north than that. They have these roots that come down, and they have these seedlings called propagules. Pretty much the seedling falls off and sticks in the mud and then grows a new plant. Sometimes they don't stick and they just float away. And you'll see them wash up on the beach sometimes. Flowers and leaves. Lots of critters called mangroves home. Then moving up the shore, a little, so now you're in the water and now you're just getting out of the water. That's your black mangrove. They grow in between the three different species, and we'll talk about white mangroves next. But black mangroves have these pneumatophores, okay? And they're roots that stick up out of the ground, out of the water, like this. And that's so that they can get gas exchange when the water is high. Many plants would drown when flooded for a long period of time. And then these guys are the ones that have the salt on the backs of the leaves. You could actually lick it off and it just tastes like salt. They have glands, they extract salt out because too much salt will kill them. And the way to remember is black, salty back. So black mangroves have salty leaves. Salt crystals. So here's a question for you, it's in your notes. Reason as to why there are little to no black mangroves in Palm Beach County. So here's the range, all the green is the range. It's very similar to the red, but from Jacksonville all the way down, and then what the heck happened with, get off. Ugh. Okay. What happened with Palm Beach County? This is Palm Beach County. Did you know Palm Beach County touches Lake Okeechobee? Has anybody ever seen Lake Okeechobee? It's one of the largest lakes in the United States. It's pretty cool. Anyway, you can stand here and look across and you can't see the other side. That's how big it is. It's pretty amazing. Okeechobee means big water in Native American. So, back to what we're talking about. So why are there no black mangroves here? Anybody know why? If you've driven around by the water, I think you kind of have an idea. It is extremely built up, okay? Huge portions of Florida's mangrove habitats have been destroyed by what they call dredge and fill construction. We want our beautiful waterfront housing and condos and restaurants and canals. So we're going to either dredge up the mangroves. This happened many years ago before they knew it was bad for the environment, okay? Money, right? Okay. And they fill in estuaries for more land to build on, okay? And so Palm Beach County has the most developed shoreline of any other county. Even Miami down here has Biscayne Bay and some nature parks out here where there are black mangroves, but not in Palm Beach County. It's wild, or it's not wild. It's very citified here. And I know, I'm from New York, just outside of New York City. So then finally, the highest up one is the white mangrove. They grow highest on the shore, and because they are the least salt tolerant. They have salt glands at the stem of their leaf right there. And they have these little peg roots, they're called peg roots, little ones that stick up out of the mud or sandy soil to keep them anchored and also getting more gas exchange. So you need to remember the order of the mangroves. So label these on your notes, 1, 2, 3, in direction from the water upland, okay? And you can see the mean, average, high tide, average, low tide, and where they all sit. So yeah, the white mangrove can get flooded once in a while on high tide, but they need to be not so in the salt like the red mangroves can be. And all kinds of critters live in here. Fish and just, they use these, animals use this as a nursery. So when you destroy the mangroves, you are destroying your ability to catch fish and feed people, or just recreate, okay? Just have fun. You're wondering why there's no fish. Well, you had to live in your waterfront home, and how'd they get the waterfront home there? They had to cut down all the mangroves. So it's like you shot yourself in the foot with that one. Okay, so that's our notes for part 2.